A black billionaire is told to wait outside by the staff of his own hotel. They don't recognize him, and worse, they assume he doesn't belong. Minutes later, the entire hotel goes into lockdown. Doors sealed, systems offline, panic everywhere. Because what no one knows is, he owns the company. But instead of fury, he brings justice, and when he finally walks back through those doors, he's not just there to reveal the truth. He's there to tear the whole system down and rebuild it from the ground up. How deep does the discrimination go? And what will he uncover when the masks come off? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The afternoon sky hung low over Chicago, a gray blanket stretching between the towering buildings of downtown. A sleek black town car pulled up smoothly to the curb, its tires crunching softly against scattered fallen leaves. The door opened and Elijah Cole stepped out, his worn gray hoodie and simple jeans a stark contrast to the luxury vehicle he'd just left. "Sir, would you like me to accompany you?" his driver asked, concern evident in his voice. Elijah's lips curved into a gentle smile as he adjusted his plain cap. "No need, Marcus. I'd like to experience this on my own." His voice was quiet but carried a natural authority that required no volume to command attention. Marcus nodded reluctantly, watching as his employer turned toward the entrance of the Argentum Hotel. The building rose before them, its modern glass facade reflecting the cloudy sky like a mirror stretching toward heaven. Elijah paused for a moment, taking in the grand entrance with its polished brass revolving doors and uniformed doormen. As he pushed through the revolving door, the lobby opened up before him, a vast expanse of cream-colored marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers. The space smelled of fresh flowers and expensive perfume, with soft classical music floating through hidden speakers. Plush leather chairs and elegant sofas were arranged in careful groupings, while well-dressed guests moved about with purpose. Elijah approached the check-in desk, his footsteps echoing softly across the marble floor. Behind the counter, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair kept her eyes fixed on her computer screen, her manicured fingers tapping away at the keyboard. "Good afternoon," Elijah said politely. The receptionist barely glanced up, her eyes skimming over his hoodie and jeans before returning to her screen. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside until security arrives." Elijah's expression remained calm, though something flickered briefly in his dark eyes. "I don't understand. I'd like to check in, please." Now the receptionist looked up fully, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Sir, this is a luxury establishment. I'm going to have to ask you to—" "I'd like to speak with the manager, please," Elijah interrupted quietly but firmly. The receptionist's hand moved beneath the desk, and within moments a security guard appeared. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his white skin flushed as he strode purposefully toward the desk. Hotel guests began to take notice, conversations dying down as heads turned to watch the scene unfold. "Is there a problem here?" the guard asked, positioning himself between Elijah and the desk. His hand rested casually on his belt near his radio. "No problem," Elijah replied evenly. "I'm simply trying to check in." The guard's eyes narrowed as they swept over Elijah's casual attire. "Sir, this is private property. We don't allow loitering or soliciting." "I'm not loitering or soliciting, I'm a guest." Elijah's voice remained steady, though his shoulders tensed slightly under the weight of the stares from other hotel patrons. A man in an expensive suit with a manager's badge appeared, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene with practiced eyes, automatically aligning himself with the security guard. "What seems to be the issue here?" "This individual needs to leave the premises," the guard stated firmly. Elijah met the manager's gaze directly. "I'm here to check in." The manager's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to exit the building immediately, or we'll be forced to call the police." A small crowd had gathered now, watching with varying expressions of curiosity and discomfort. Some pulled out their phones, recording the interaction. Elijah stood still for a moment, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to the tension surrounding him. Finally, he nodded once. "I understand." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit, his movements deliberate and dignified despite the humiliation of the situation. As he reached the revolving door, he paused and looked back over his shoulder, his gaze sweeping across the lobby one final time. The manager had already turned away, muttering to the security guard, another one trying to sneak in. Elijah's face remained impassive as he pushed through the revolving door and disappeared around the corner, leaving behind a lobby full of whispers and uncomfortable glances. 10 minutes after Elijah's departure, the Argentum's lobby hummed with its usual afternoon activity. The marble floors gleamed under the warm lighting as guests wheeled their designer luggage across the pristine surface. At the front desk, the young receptionist who had dismissed Elijah earlier laughed with her colleague. "Can you believe that guy?" she said, scrolling through her social media feed. "Walking in here dressed like he was heading to the gym." Her coworker smirked. "At least security handled it quickly. We get more and more of those types trying their luck these days." The security guard who had confronted Elijah stood near the entrance, chest puffed out with self-importance as he recounted the incident to another staff member. "You should have seen how fast he backed down when I showed up." The hotel manager passed by, nodding approvingly at the guard. "Good work earlier, Johnson. Can't let people think they can just walk in here off the street." A well-dressed couple approached the check-in desk, and the receptionist's practiced smile snapped back into place. She had just begun typing their information when the first flicker came. The crystal chandeliers dimmed momentarily, then brightened, then dimmed again. The couple exchanged worried glances. "Oh, don't worry," the receptionist assured them, though her brow furrowed as she stared at her screen. "Sometimes the power—" Her words cut off as her monitor suddenly flashed bright blue, displaying bold text. "System error." Across the vast lobby, similar scenes played out at every computer terminal. The concierge's screen went dark mid-booking. The bellhop's electronic tablet died in his hands. The massive digital art installation that covered one wall flickered and died, leaving an empty black canvas. In the executive offices upstairs, confusion turned to concern as computers shut down one by one. The hotel's operations manager jabbed frantically at his phone's screen, but the device remained stubbornly silent. No signal, no internet, nothing. Throughout the building's 30 floors, electronic door locks engaged with simultaneous clicks. In the parking garage, security gates slammed shut. The hotel's dozen elevators ground to a halt between floors, their emergency lights casting an eerie glow over startled passengers. The luxury suites, pride of the Argentum, went dark as smart systems failed. Television screens died mid-program, climate controls reset, electronic blinds snapped shut. Even the electronic toilets, with their heated seats and automated functions, ceased working. In the grand ballroom, where a tech conference had been setting up their equipment, every screen and projector went black. The sophisticated sound system crackled, then fell silent. The silence lasted exactly 30 seconds before a voice filled every room, every hallway, and every public space in the hotel. It was neither male nor female, neither young nor old, a perfectly modulated, eerily calm robotic voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "This hotel is under emergency management protocol. Please proceed to the main ballroom for further instruction. This is not a drill. All guests and staff members must proceed to the main ballroom immediately." The message repeated, its artificial tones echoing off marble and glass. In the lobby, the security guard reached for his radio, but it produced only static. The manager pulled out his cell phone, then his backup phone, finding both useless. Guests began to rise from their seats, some angry, others worried. "What's happening?" demanded a woman in an expensive business suit. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes. The hotel manager raised his hands, trying to project calm despite the sweat beading on his forehead. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. I'm sure this is just a temporary technical issue." The robotic voice continued its message, drowning out his attempts at reassurance. Hotel staff, trained for emergencies but clearly unprepared for this scenario, began guiding guests toward the ballroom. The crowd moved slowly at first, then with increasing urgency as the minutes ticked by and no systems returned to life. In the conference rooms, frustrated executives packed up useless laptops. In the spa, confused patrons wrapped in robes joined the migration. From the fitness center, the pool, the restaurants, and the bars, people streamed toward the ballroom, their footsteps echoing through darkened corridors lit only by emergency lighting. The hotel's general manager arrived, his face red with exertion after climbing 20 flights of stairs. He pushed through the crowd, barking into a dead phone. "Get me corporate!" "Someone get me corporate right now." The main ballroom, with its soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers, quickly filled with a mix of guests and staff. The space, designed to hold 800 people, grew cramped as more arrived. Murmurs of confusion and anger rippled through the crowd. Several people filmed with their phones, though none of the devices could connect to send their footage anywhere. The hotel's executive team huddled near the stage, their faces pale under the emergency lights. The head of security spoke in harsh whispers about system breaches and protocols, while the IT manager repeatedly shook his head saying, "This isn't possible, this isn't possible." A sharp click echoed through the room as an unmarked door at the back of the ballroom opened. The crowd near the door parted, creating a narrow path through the sea of people. Elijah Cole stepped through the doorway, his worn hoodie and cap replaced by an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. Behind him came Lorraine Marshall, her silver hair gleaming, her expression both stern and satisfied. 2 lawyers followed, carrying sleek briefcases. Elijah's presence commanded attention without effort. His calm demeanor seemed to fill the space as he walked steadily toward the stage, the crowd unconsciously making way. The security guard who had confronted him earlier stared, his mouth hanging open in recognition. The receptionist's face drained of color as Elijah passed her. Lorraine's heels clicked against the floor as she followed Elijah, her chin held high. Her eyes swept over the staff members who had once been her colleagues, lingering particularly on those who had stayed silent during her own dismissal years ago. The lawyers moved with practiced efficiency, their expressions professional and unreadable as they flanked Elijah and Lorraine. The group reached the stage steps, where the hotel executive stood frozen in confusion and dawning recognition. Elijah adjusted his collar, a simple gesture that somehow carried more authority than all the blustering of the hotel management combined. His dark eyes surveyed the room, taking in every face, every reaction, every whispered conversation. Without hurry or hesitation, he began walking up the steps to the stage. The ballroom hummed with nervous energy as hundreds of guests and staff members crowded together. The grand crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over worried faces, while emergency lights added an unsettling blue tinge to the ornate walls. Near the front of the room, a cluster of executives huddled together, their usual confidence replaced by visible anxiety. "We're being hacked," whispered Marcus Thompson, the hotel's chief technology officer, his fingers still frantically tapping at his dead phone. "This has to be a cyber attack. No one should be able to override our systems like this." Patricia Chen, head of operations, shook her head. "Look at how organized this is. The timing, the announcements, the lockdown. This feels more like a government inspection. Did anyone miss an audit deadline?" Their whispers carried through the tense air, adding to the chorus of speculation rippling through the crowd. Hotel guests in business attire stood shoulder to shoulder with spa patrons in robes, while uniformed staff members shifted uncomfortably, stealing glances at their supervisors for any hint of explanation. The young receptionist who had dismissed Elijah earlier pressed herself against a wall, her earlier bravado completely vanished. The security guard stood nearby, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, eyes fixed straight ahead as if standing at attention. Both had recognized Elijah the moment he entered, and the realization of their earlier actions had drained the color from their faces. Without warning, the main lights dimmed further, plunging the room into a deeper blue twilight. A single spotlight blazed to life, illuminating the stage in a perfect circle of white light. The crowd's murmuring grew louder, then quickly hushed as Elijah Cole stepped into the spotlight's beam. He moved with deliberate grace to the center of the stage, his polished shoes gleaming. The microphone stand waited there, adjusted to his exact height. Behind him, Lorraine Marshall stood like a sentinel, her tablet ready in her hands, while the 2 lawyers arranged their briefcases on a small table. Elijah adjusted the microphone with practiced ease, his movements unhurried. When he spoke, his voice filled the room with calm authority, each word clear and measured. 6 months ago, I acquired 62% of this hotel's parent company. The statement landed like a physical force in the room. Several executives visibly flinched. The hotel manager's face went from red to white in an instant. Complete silence fell over the crowd as the implications of those words sank in. I came here today as a guest, Elijah continued, his tone unchanged. I left as a reminder. He turned slightly, nodding to Lorraine. Her fingers moved across her tablet with precise efficiency. Suddenly, the massive screens that lined the ballroom's walls flickered to life, each displaying a different scene captured by security cameras throughout the hotel. On one screen, a front desk clerk rolled her eyes and lost a reservation after seeing an African-American family approach. On another, kitchen staff mocked the accents of international guests while deliberately delaying their room service orders. A third showed a hiring manager systematically moving resumes with African-American-sounding names to the bottom of the pile before accidentally deleting them. Scene after scene played out across the screens, each one damning in its casual cruelty. The footage was crystal clear, the audio perfectly captured. Dates and times stamped each clip, showing a pattern that stretched back months. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Some guests covered their mouths in shock. Others nodded grimly, as if seeing their own experiences validated. Among the staff, reactions varied dramatically. Several hung their heads, unable to watch their own documented behavior. Others glanced nervously at their colleagues, wondering if they would appear in the next clip. A few stood straighter, their expressions hardening with defensive anger. The board members, gathered in a tight group near the stage, maintained carefully blank expressions, though their rigid postures betrayed their discomfort. The hotel's general manager gripped the back of a chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. Elijah let the footage play for exactly 1 minute before raising his hand. Lorraine tapped her tablet, and the screens froze on a final image. A statistical analysis showing hiring patterns, guest complaints, and service disparities broken down by race. This isn't about one mistake, Elijah said, his voice carrying easily through the silent room. It's about a system that rewards it. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Several of the younger staff members nodded unconsciously, while others seemed to shrink into themselves, as if trying to become invisible. Behind the row of board members, Lorraine began to move. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she walked behind each one, her movements precise and purposeful. In her hands, she held a stack of red envelopes, each one sealed with the company's logo in gold. One by one, she placed an envelope in front of each board member. The red paper seemed to glow under the dim lights, demanding attention. Some board members stared at their envelopes as if they might explode. Others immediately reached for them, hands trembling slightly. The last envelope was placed before the board chairman, who had been with the company for 25 years. Lorraine's eyes met his for a brief moment, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or remembrance. She had once served coffee in these same board meetings back when she was just another invisible employee. The sound of tearing paper filled the air as the first envelope was opened, then another and another. The board members' expressions shifted from concern to shock as they read the contents. The chairman was the last to open his envelope, his fingers moving with deliberate slowness, as if delaying the inevitable. The red envelopes lay open on the table before each board member, their contents exposed like wounds. Inside each one, a formal termination letter detailed their immediate dismissal from all positions and responsibilities. The crisp letterhead bore Elijah's signature, along with the corporate seal and today's date. There was no room for interpretation or negotiation. Harold Whitman, a board member of 15 years with silver hair and pale, lined features, pushed back his chair with a screech that cut through the tense silence. His face had turned an alarming shade of red as he stabbed a finger in Elijah's direction. "You can't do this," he sputtered, his voice trembling with rage and disbelief. This is outrageous. We built this company. You have no right." Elijah didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I already did." The words were simple, matter of fact, carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The spotlight caught the slight tilt of his head as he regarded Whitman with calm attention. Several other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some clutching their termination letters as if searching for loopholes, others staring straight ahead in shocked silence. The chairman remained frozen, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. Elijah nodded to Lorraine again. The screens flickered to life with new footage. This time it wasn't security camera videos, but rather a cascade of internal communications. Emails appeared, each one more damning than the last. The text was enlarged, impossible to miss or deny. From H. Whitman. To Board Distribution List. Subject: Proposed Diversity Training Initiative. Another waste of resources. Our clientele expects a certain atmosphere. Let's table this indefinitely. From M. Richardson. To Executive Committee. Subject: HR Policy Updates. Are we really going to cave to this corporate wokeness? Next, they'll want us to turn the presidential suite into a meditation room. Ha ha ha. The emails kept coming, filling the screens with evidence of systemic discrimination wrapped in casual corporate language. Some guests in the audience began taking photos with their phones, while others whispered and pointed at particularly egregious messages. Then the screens went dark for a moment before a new window appeared, an audio player. Lorraine's finger hovered over the play button, her expression hardening. She remembered these voices all too well. They had once discussed her own fate in similar tones. The recording began to play, filling the ballroom with the unmistakable voices of the board members during a private meeting. "Look, let's be honest here," came the chairman's voice, slightly slurred from what was presumably an extended lunch. "Diversity doesn't sell five-star rooms. Our clients pay premium rates for a specific experience, and that experience doesn't include, well, you know what I mean." Murmurs of agreement followed, along with chuckling and the clink of glasses. The recording continued, capturing casual racism dressed up in corporate euphemisms and strategic concerns. Lorraine's eyes narrowed as she listened, her posture rigid. These were the same voices that had dismissed her complaints years ago, the same people who had nodded sympathetically while signing her termination papers. Now they sat before her, their power stripped away, their true nature exposed for all to see. The young receptionist who had tried to turn Elijah away earlier pressed her hands to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes as she realized the full scope of the system she had been participating in. The security guard stood at attention, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. One by one, new security personnel, wearing different uniforms than the hotel's regular staff, approached the board members. These guards moved with military precision, their expressions professional and detached. "Please come with us," they said quietly to each former board member. Some went quietly, gathering their belongings with shaking hands. Others protested, demanding to speak with their lawyers or threatening lawsuits. The guards remained impassive, gently but firmly escorting them toward the exits. Harold Whitman had to be led by two guards, his face now purple with rage as he shouted about shareholder rights and legal consequences. The chairman went last, rising slowly from his seat, like a man aged decades in minutes. He paused for a moment, looking at Lorraine with a flicker of recognition, then allowed himself to be led away without a word. The ballroom doors closed behind the last of the former board members with a soft but final click. The atmosphere in the room shifted, as if a heavy weight had been lifted, replaced by the electric anticipation of change. Elijah turned back to face the gathered crowd, his expression serious but tinged with something that might have been hope. The spotlight followed his movement, casting his shadow long across the stage. "This is just the beginning," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "This hotel was built on exclusion. We're about to rebuild it, from the ground up, with the right hands." Lorraine stepped forward, carrying a thick manila folder. She placed it carefully on the podium in front of Elijah, smoothing it with one hand. The folder's cover bore a simple title in bold black letters: Rebuild Phase 1, Personnel Review. The words seemed to hang in the air, promising both opportunity and accountability. Staff members exchanged glances, some nervous, others hopeful. In the back of the room, a young bellhop straightened his uniform and lifted his chin, while near the front, a veteran housekeeper wiped away tears with a small smile. The last of the shell-shocked employees filed out of the ballroom, their whispered conversations echoing through the marble corridors. Lorraine stood by the door, watching them leave with a mix of satisfaction and something deeper, a old wound finally beginning to heal. When the room had emptied, she turned to Elijah and gestured for him to follow. Their footsteps echoed through the now quiet hallways as Lorraine led the way toward the old service wing. The pristine public areas of the hotel gradually gave way to more utilitarian spaces, service corridors with scuffed walls, storage rooms, and the behind-the-scenes machinery that kept the luxury hotel running. Elijah followed silently, his hands in his pockets taking in every detail. The familiar smell of industrial cleaner and old carpet brought back memories. He'd walked these halls countless times as a teenager, pushing his janitor's cart, invisible to the guests and most of the staff. They passed the employee break room, now modernized but still in the same location. Through its window, Elijah caught a glimpse of the same old vending machine, still humming in the corner. Lorraine noticed his glance and gave a small, knowing smile. "Some things never change," she said softly, her voice carrying years of history. They turned down a narrower hallway, one clearly unused for regular operations. The paint was peeling in places, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. At the end stood a heavy metal door, its surface marked with rust around the edges. A faded sign read, "Employee Storage Archives," in block letters. Lorraine pulled out an old keyring from her bag, the metal worn smooth from years of use. She sorted through the keys with practiced fingers until she found the right one, smaller than the others, with a distinctive brass tarnish. The lock turned with a resistant groan. Inside, the room smelled of dust and forgotten papers. Metal lockers lined the walls, their gray paint chipped and faded. Old filing cabinets stood like sentinels in the corners, labeled with years long past. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows when Lorraine pulled its chain. She moved with purpose toward a specific locker, number 247. Her fingers traced the numbers before inserting another key. The door opened with a metallic creak that seemed to echo through time itself. Inside the locker, everything remained exactly as she'd left it decades ago. Pay stubs, yellowed with age, were rubber-banded together in neat bundles. Her old name badge sat on top, the plastic clouded, but still showing her younger face smiling professionally at the camera. Beneath these lay a photograph, its edges soft and faded. Lorraine picked up the photograph with careful fingers. In it, a teenage Elijah stood beside her younger self, both wearing the hotel's old brown janitor uniforms. His face was serious even then, but there was a hint of a smile at the corners of his mouth. Her arm was around his shoulders in a protective gesture. "This was taken 2 days before." Her voice trailed off, but Elijah nodded. They both remembered. The memory washed over Lorraine like a wave. She could see it clearly. The angry security manager pointing at Elijah, accusing him of stealing a guest's watch. The young board members, not much older than they were now, standing in their expensive suits watching the scene unfold with barely concealed amusement. He was cleaning the room when the guest reported it missing. Lorraine's voice was quiet but steady as she recalled that day. "I knew Elijah. I knew he would never steal, but they didn't want to hear it." She remembered stepping forward, standing between Elijah and the security manager. "Check the security cameras," she had insisted. "Check his locker. Check everything. This boy is innocent." But they hadn't checked anything. Instead, they'd called her insubordinate, a troublemaker. The board members had exchanged knowing looks, their smirks saying more than words ever could. No one else spoke up. No one else defended them. "They fired us both that day," Lorraine continued, her finger tracing the edge of the photograph. "But they didn't stop there. They made sure neither of us could get work at any other hotel in the city. They called it protecting the industry standard." Elijah listened quietly, his face composed but his eyes intense. He remembered how Lorraine had tried to fight it, going to every hotel in Chicago, then the surrounding cities. But the blacklist was thorough. Her 20 years of experience meant nothing against the power of the Argentum's board. "The watch turned up 3 days later," Lorraine said, a bitter smile touching her lips. The guest had left it in their rental car. There was no apology, No offer to rehire us, just silence. Elijah stepped forward and carefully took the photograph from her hands. He studied it for a moment, then placed it in his jacket pocket with deliberate care. "It starts here," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of years of planning. From his other pocket, he withdrew a sleek keycard. The hotel's new logo was embossed in silver on one side. Above it, in clear professional lettering, were the words, "Director, Internal Rebuild." He held it out to Lorraine. She stared at it, not moving to take it immediately. The fluorescent light glinted off the card's surface, making the letters seem to shimmer. "You're the only one who knows what really needs to change," Elijah said quietly. "You're the only one I trust to make it right." Lorraine's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the keycard. Decades of memories flooded through her mind. The humiliation, the anger, the years of watching others suffer the same injustices. But now, finally, she had the power to make real change. She took the keycard, feeling its weight in her hand. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded firmly. Together, they walked out of the storage room, leaving behind the dust and darkness of the past. Their footsteps echoed with purpose through the old service corridor, heading toward a future they would build together. The morning sun cast long shadows through the glass conference room on the top floor of the Argentum. Elijah sat at the head of the sleek table, his laptop open before him, while Lorraine occupied the chair to his right. The usual bustling sounds of the luxury hotel were absent, replaced by an almost eerie quiet. Only the soft hum of the air conditioning system broke the silence. Spread across the table were personnel files, hundreds of them, each containing years of evaluations, applications, and incident reports. Lorraine picked up another folder, her expression growing darker as she read through its contents. "Marcus Thompson," she said, holding up a photo of a young black man in a bellhop's uniform. "Applied for supervisor position 5 times in 3 years. Each time, they said he wasn't ready. Meanwhile, they promoted 3 less experienced employees over him." Elijah nodded, making a note on his laptop. "Add him to the priority list." Through the glass walls, they could see security teams patrolling the empty corridors. The hotel's systems were being brought back online gradually, carefully monitored to ensure only essential functions were restored. The grand chandeliers in the lobby remained dim, and the famous fountain in the courtyard stood still and silent. "Here's another one," Lorraine said, pulling out a thick file. "Dr. Maria Gonzalez has a PhD in hotel management from Cornell. Been working in our kitchen for 2 years as a dishwasher because her credentials from Mexico weren't verifiable enough." Her voice carried a note of controlled anger. Elijah's fingers paused over the keyboard. "How did we miss this?" "The system was designed to miss it," Lorraine replied, her voice soft but firm. "That's why it worked so well for so long." They continued working through the morning, creating a list of names. Each file told a similar story. Talented individuals pushed aside, overlooked, or deliberately held back. By mid-morning, they had identified 15 candidates for what Elijah was calling the Rebuild Task Force. Security began escorting the selected employees to the conference room one by one. Marcus Thompson arrived first, his bellhop uniform crisp despite the early hour. His eyes widened when he recognized Elijah from the previous day's events, but he maintained his professional composure. "Mr. Thompson," Lorraine said warmly, gesturing to a chair. "Please, sit down." Marcus sat carefully, his posture straight and alert. Elijah pushed a folder across the table to him. Inside was a new contract and job description. Operations Reform Specialist. "We've been reviewing your application history," Elijah said quietly, "and your qualifications. Would you be interested in helping us rebuild this hotel's management structure from the ground up?" Marcus stared at the contract, then back at Elijah and Lorraine. "Is this real?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Very real," Lorraine assured him, "and long overdue." Throughout the morning, more employees arrived. Dr. Maria Gonzalez entered the room still wearing her kitchen uniform, her hands red from hot water and harsh soap. When Lorraine handed her the new contract for Systems Implementation Director, tears welled in her eyes. "I almost gave up," she said, her voice trembling. I was starting to believe maybe they were right about me. They weren't, Elijah stated firmly. They never were. Carmen Rodriguez, a front desk trainee, arrived next. She'd been relegated to back office work after a supervisor complained that her accent was too thick for guest interactions, despite her perfect English and hospitality degree. Your multilingual skills are an asset, Lorraine told her, presenting her with a position as guest relations coordinator. We need more voices like yours, not fewer. One by one, the room filled with employees whose potential had been deliberately suppressed. Each person's story was different, but the pattern was the same: systematic exclusion masked as standard procedure. As they reviewed their new contracts, the atmosphere in the room began to shift from disbelief to cautious hope. The last person to enter was Simone Hayes, a junior HR assistant. Unlike the others, she hadn't been summoned. She had requested the meeting herself. She stood in the doorway, clutching her tablet to her chest, her dark eyes nervous but determined. "Come in, Ms. Hayes," Elijah said gently, noticing her hesitation. Simone stepped into the room, glancing at the others before focusing on Elijah. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled a flash drive from her pocket. "I've been collecting things," she said, her voice barely audible. "Documents, emails, recordings, things that weren't supposed to be kept." She placed the flash drive on the table, then added quickly, "But I was too scared to say anything before." The room fell silent. Everyone watched as Elijah picked up the small device, turning it over in his hands. He looked at Simone, his gaze steady and understanding. "Not anymore," he said simply. He plugged the drive into his laptop and watched as the screen lit up with hundreds of files. Each one was meticulously labeled and dated, creating a detailed chronicle of the hotel's discriminatory practices. Years of evidence that someone had been watching, documenting, waiting for a chance to speak up. The evening cast long shadows across the secure back-office suite where Elijah, Lorraine, and Simone huddled around a large monitor. The room, tucked away in a quiet corner of the Argentum's administrative wing, hummed with the soft whir of computers and tension-filled silence. Coffee cups sat forgotten on the desk, gone cold hours ago. Simone's hands moved swiftly across the keyboard, opening folder after folder from her flash drive. Each click revealed new evidence of the hotel's systematic discrimination. The screen filled with spreadsheets, email threads, and PDF files, all meticulously organized and dated. "I started collecting these my first week here," Simone explained, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. Something felt wrong about how complaints were being handled. She pulled up a spreadsheet titled Complaint Resolution Statistics 2021 to 2023. Lorraine leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the numbers. The data showed a clear pattern. Complaints filed by white guests received responses within hours, while those from people of color often went days without acknowledgement. "Look at this," Simone said, clicking through to another folder. "These are the hiring statistics for the past 5 years." The screen filled with graphs and charts, each telling the same story. Qualified candidates with names suggesting African, Hispanic, or Asian descent were consistently passed over for positions. Elijah stood silently behind them, his reflection in the monitor's glass steady and focused. He watched as Simone navigated through years of carefully preserved evidence. "Here's where it gets worse," Simone continued, opening an email thread. "HR directors were instructed to flag certain applications for additional review. But look at the criteria they used." She highlighted a section of text that listed cultural fit and brand alignment as key factors. Lorraine's breath caught. They were using code words. "Exactly," Simone confirmed, pulling up more emails. And when complaints did come in from employees of color, they were automatically categorized differently. She opened a folder labeled Resolved Cases and clicked through dozens of complaint forms. Each one showed the same pattern: legitimate grievances marked as resolved, without any actual investigation or action taken. The room grew heavier with each new revelation. Simone's documentation was thorough, presenting an undeniable pattern of systematic discrimination hidden behind corporate policy and procedure. "This one," Simone hesitated, her cursor hovering over an audio file. This was from last month. A VP's exit interview with James Morton, a black employee from accounting who quit after being passed over for promotion 3 times. She clicked play. The room filled with voices. "Your tone has been rather aggressive throughout this process, Mr. Morton," a dismissive male voice said. "I'm simply stating facts about my experience here," replied a controlled, professional voice. "See that attitude right there? That's exactly why you weren't ready for a leadership position." Lorraine's hands clenched into fists. The recording continued, capturing every microaggression, every subtle dig, every moment of professional dignity being stripped away. When the audio ended, Simone quickly wiped at her eyes. "I should have done something sooner," she whispered. "I kept telling myself I was gathering evidence, building a case. But really, I was just scared." Elijah finally moved from his position behind them, pulling up a chair to sit beside Simone. His presence was calm, grounding. "You spoke when it mattered," he said quietly. "Fear doesn't make you complicit. Using that fear against others does." He gestured to the screen full of evidence. "You didn't just collect data. You created a record. You made sure these stories couldn't be erased." Lorraine reached over and squeezed Simone's hand. "Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right despite that fear." They worked through the night, organizing the evidence into clear categories. Simone's documentation was extensive, years of subtle discrimination laid bare in emails, memos, and statistics. She had captured everything: the casual racism in internal communications, the systematic suppression of complaints, the carefully worded policies designed to maintain exclusion while appearing neutral. Around midnight, Elijah's legal team arrived. They began drafting a comprehensive brief, incorporating Simone's evidence into a legally actionable document. The lawyers moved efficiently, their expressions growing grimmer with each new piece of evidence they reviewed. As the first hints of dawn began to color the sky outside their window, Elijah opened his email. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he typed a single line to the parent company's CEO. "We need to talk. Urgently." He hit send, then turned to Lorraine. His voice was quiet, but carried the weight of certainty. "Tomorrow we go upstairs." The morning sun glinted off the glass and steel facade of Argentum Holdings' corporate headquarters, its 60 floors stretching toward the Chicago sky like a monument to power and privilege. Inside the top-floor boardroom, executives in tailored suits lounged in leather chairs, their conversation punctuated by casual laughter and the clink of coffee cups. "Probably some kid with a laptop trying to make a point," said Marcus Wheeler, the chief operating officer, dismissing the previous day's events at the hotel. His perfectly pressed suit and manicured hands spoke of someone who'd never worked a day of manual labor in his life. Patricia Downs, VP of Operations, nodded in agreement. "It says they've contained the breach. We should have everything back to normal by end of day." She scrolled through her phone, barely looking up at her colleagues. "Still," said James Harrison, the chief financial officer, "we should review our cybersecurity protocols. Can't have this kind of disruption during peak season." He adjusted his gold cufflinks, a nervous habit he'd developed over years of board meetings. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany conference table. The room buzzed with the quiet confidence of people who'd never had their authority seriously challenged. "What about the staff changes?" someone asked. "I heard the entire board was escorted out." "Temporary confusion," Wheeler assured them. "Legal's handling it. Nothing to worry about." The double doors at the end of the boardroom swung open. The conversation died instantly. Elijah Cole stood in the doorway, his presence commanding attention without a word. Gone was yesterday's casual attire. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that spoke of quiet power. Lorraine Marshall stood to his right, her expression stern and focused. On his left, a sharp-featured attorney carried a leather briefcase. The executives froze, their faces cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, fear. Wheeler's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Harrison's fingers stilled on his cufflinks. Elijah walked slowly to the head of the table, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. He placed a thick file folder on the gleaming wood surface. The label read clearly, Internal Documentation of Discriminatory Practices, 2018 to 2023. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "I believe we need to discuss some concerning patterns in your corporate culture." Patricia Downs found her voice first. "Mr. Cole, this is a private board meeting. You can't just—" "Actually, I can." Elijah's attorney stepped forward, placing a document on the table. "As majority shareholder of Argenum Holdings, Mr. Cole has every right to be here." The room erupted in whispers. Executives reached for their phones, frantically checking stock notifications and news feeds. Elijah opened the whistleblower file, spreading out carefully organized documents. This file contains 3 years of systematically suppressed complaints, discriminatory hiring practices, and documented instances of racial bias. He laid out page after page of evidence, all meticulously collected by your own HR staff. Wheeler's face reddened. "Those documents are confidential company property." "Which is why," Elijah continued as if Wheeler hadn't spoken, "I've already submitted copies to the State Ethics Commission." He nodded to his attorney, who produced another document. Along with signed affidavits from 17 former employees detailing how their complaints were buried. The attorney placed the affidavits on the table. Each signature was highlighted in bright yellow, impossible to ignore. "You're bluffing," Harrison said, but his voice wavered. Lorraine stepped forward, tablet in hand. She turned it to show them a draft news article from a major publication. The headline read, "Luxury Hotel Chain Faces Systemic Racism Allegations. Whistleblower Evidence Reveals Years of Discrimination." "The story breaks in 1 hour," she said quietly. Phones began buzzing across the table as stock alerts came in. The share price was already dropping as rumors hit the market. Executives grabbed their devices, faces paling at the numbers. "This is outrageous." Wheeler stood up, his chair scraping back. "You'll destroy this company." "No," Elijah replied, his voice still measured. "You've been destroying it for years. One denied application, one ignored complaint, one cultural fit rejection at a time." He looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. "You've built a culture of exclusion and called it luxury. That ends today." Patricia Downs raised her hands in a placating gesture. "Mr. Cole, surely we can discuss this. Come to some arrangement." "This isn't a negotiation," Elijah cut her off. He stood straight, his presence filling the room. "This is your last chance to be part of the fix." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Around the table, faces showed varying degrees of panic and resignation as they watched their carefully constructed world begin to crumble. Elijah turned without another word and walked toward the door. Lorraine followed, a manila folder tucked under her arm. The label was visible to everyone in the room. Phase 2, Rebuild Blueprint. The executives sat in stunned silence as the doors closed behind them, leaving only the sound of dropping stock prices and the weight of decades of consequences finally coming due. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Conference Room B, now transformed into a bustling command center for the Rebuild Task Force. Where corporate presentations once droned, a new energy hummed. Laptops lined the mahogany table, their screens glowing with spreadsheets and personnel files. Rolled blueprints spilled across one end, held down by coffee cups and legal pads. Elijah stood at the head of the table, his suit jacket now draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up. Around him sat the carefully selected team: Maria Rodriguez, the front desk trainee whose accent had been mocked; James Thompson, the bellhop passed over for promotion 5 times; Dr. Sarah Chen, the dishwasher with a master's degree; and Simone Watson, the HR assistant turned whistleblower. Each face showed a mix of determination and disbelief at their sudden elevation. "This isn't just about changing faces," Elijah said, his voice steady and clear. "We're here to rebuild the foundation." He gestured to the hotel blueprints spread before them. "Every floor, every department, every policy needs to be examined." Lorraine moved around the table, distributing thick folders to each team member. Her movements were precise, purposeful. She'd traded her usual business casual attire for a sharp blazer and pants, ready for the work ahead. These folders contain the last 5 years of hiring data, promotion records, and complaint files for your assigned departments, she explained, pausing beside each person. We need to understand the patterns before we can break them. Maria opened her folder, scanning the front desk records. Her eyes widened. There hasn't been a single minority supervisor in 3 years, she said, flipping through pages. But look at these customer satisfaction scores. Some of our highest ratings come from minority staff. James nodded, reviewing the concierge department files. Same pattern here. Plenty of us doing the work, none of us leading it. His voice carried years of frustrated observation. Dr. Chen studied the kitchen department data, her academic training evident in her methodical approach. The segregation is systematic, she noted, creating neat columns in her notebook. Back-of-house positions are predominantly minorities, while customer-facing roles. She trailed off, the implications clear. Simone's hands trembled slightly as she opened the HR records, files she'd once been told to file and forget. Now, with Elijah's support, these same documents would fuel change instead of hiding it. Start with your assigned departments, Lorraine instructed, moving to a whiteboard where she'd drawn a detailed organizational chart. We need complete audits, hiring practices, promotion histories, salary disparities, complaint patterns, everything. The team dove into their work, the room filling with the sound of typing and paper shuffling. Occasionally, someone would call out a particularly stark finding, adding another piece to the puzzle of institutional bias they were uncovering. Look at this, Dr. Chen said, turning her laptop around. Kitchen staff with culinary degrees are consistently placed in prep roles if they're minorities, while less qualified white applicants get cooking positions. James held up a stack of customer complaints. These were all filed against the same supervisor for discriminatory treatment, but marked resolved without investigation. Hour after hour, the evidence mounted. Lorraine moved between team members, offering guidance and support, her own experience lending weight to their findings. She paused occasionally to make notes on her tablet, each entry another item for the rebuild blueprint. As evening fell, the city lights began twinkling through the windows. The team had ordered dinner. Pizza boxes and empty coffee cups now mingled with their work materials. Despite the long hours, no one showed signs of leaving. Elijah stood by the window, phone in hand, watching the skyline darken. The number he dialed was one he hadn't used in years, but never forgotten. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. Dr. Harrison speaking. Professor, Elijah said warmly. It's Elijah Cole. Elijah! The professor's voice brightened with recognition. I've been following the news about Argentum Holdings. Quite a statement you're making. Elijah turned from the window, looking at his team still hard at work. That's actually why I'm calling. I need your expertise in ethical organizational restructuring. Tell me more, Dr. Harrison said, interest clear in his tone. I'm not just building a better hotel, Elijah explained, his voice low but intense. I'm building a mirror for the industry. Every change we make here needs to be documented, studied, proven effective. When other hotels claim diversity is bad for business, I want data that proves them wrong. Papers rustled on the professor's end. You're talking about creating a case study for institutional change. Exactly. We need protocols that can be replicated, results that can't be dismissed. Will you help us? Count me in, Dr. Harrison replied without hesitation. Send me what you have so far. We'll start building the framework tomorrow. Elijah ended the call and walked to the window again. The city stretched before him, a maze of lights and shadows. Somewhere in that skyline was the younger version of himself, mop in hand, working late nights in these same halls. He remembered the feel of that mop handle, the ache in his shoulders, the way some guests would look through him as if he were invisible. The reflection in the window showed a different man now, one with the power to make change. Behind him, reflected in the glass, his team worked on. Each person focused on dismantling the very barriers that had held them back. The contrast wasn't lost on him. From cleaning these halls to rebuilding them, from being silenced to giving others a voice. The city lights blurred slightly as he took in the moment. In the glass, he could almost see his younger self, moving quietly through empty corridors, dreaming of a day when things would be different. That day had finally come. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elijah's temporary office at the Argentum. He sat at his desk, reviewing progress reports from the rebuild task force, when his phone buzzed. A new email notification appeared. Urgent. Notice of emergency board vote. Share buyback resolution. Lorraine entered just as he opened the message, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She noticed his expression shift ever so slightly. Not quite a frown, but a subtle tightening around his eyes. "Something's wrong?" she asked, placing 1 cup on his desk. Elijah turned his monitor so she could see. "Richard Whitman is making his move. Emergency board vote to force a buyback of my controlling shares." His voice remained steady, showing no trace of concern. Lorraine's hand tightened around her coffee cup. "On what grounds?" "Improper use of hotel systems and breach of fiduciary duty," Elijah read, a hint of amusement in his tone. "They're citing the system shutdown as corporate sabotage." He pressed the intercom button on his desk phone. "Sarah, could you ask the legal team to join us? Immediately." His voice was calm, almost casual. Within minutes, the office filled with a flurry of activity. 3 lawyers in crisp suits rushed in, carrying tablets and legal documents. Junior associates followed with laptops and stacks of papers. The atmosphere crackled with tension as they spread documents across the conference table. "Mr. Cole, this is serious," Marcus Chen, the head lawyer, said as he scanned the notice. "They're invoking Article 7, Section 12 of the acquisition agreement. If they can prove system manipulation was used for personal vendetta rather than legitimate business purposes." "Pull up the original contract," Elijah interrupted softly. He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. The lawyers scrambled through digital files. Marcus found it first, projecting it onto the wall screen. "Here it is. Article 7, Section 12 does indeed give the board power to force a buyback if..." "Look at who wrote that clause," Elijah said, still facing the window. Marcus scrolled to the document history. His eyebrows shot up. "It was... you? 6 months ago? During the acquisition negotiations?" Elijah turned around, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I wrote it myself. Every word." The room fell silent. Lorraine looked at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. She'd seen that expression before, when he was 3 moves ahead in chess matches they'd played during lunch breaks years ago. "It's a trap," she said quietly. Elijah nodded. "A dummy clause, designed specifically to bait exactly this kind of reaction." He walked to the table and tapped a few keys on the nearest laptop. Another document appeared on the screen. "Now let's activate the real clause, Section 12B, subsection 3. Marcus leaned forward, adjusting his glasses as he read aloud. "Any attempt to invoke buyback rights shall trigger immediate review of ethics compliance. Board members found to have engaged in discriminatory practices or ethics violations shall forfeit all buyback rights, effective immediately." The junior lawyers began furiously taking notes. Lorraine smiled, remembering the young janitor who used to read law books during his breaks. "Richard Whitman has quite a history," Elijah said, pulling up another file. 3 racial discrimination complaints in the past year alone, all buried in HR thanks to his position. All documented by Simone. He pressed a button on his phone. "Simone, could you bring in the Whitman files?" Moments later, Simone entered carrying a thick folder. Her hands were steady now, confidence replacing her former timidity. She laid out document after document, emails showing Whitman blocking minority promotions, recordings of racist comments in board meetings, statistics revealing systematic discrimination in his hiring practices. "The clause was never about protecting the company from me," Elijah explained, his voice carrying quiet authority. "It was about creating a mechanism to remove board members who proved themselves unfit through their own actions." Marcus read through the evidence, nodding slowly. "This is airtight. The ethics violations are clear and documented. Under Section 12B, Whitman's buyback rights are automatically void. Elijah sat down at his computer and began typing. The room waited in respectful silence, broken only by the soft click of keys. After a few minutes, he looked up. "I've just sent our formal response," he said. "The emergency vote is canceled. Whitman's board position is terminated, effective immediately." Lorraine picked up one of the legal documents, reading the fine print at the bottom of Section 12B. A quote stood out, written in Elijah's characteristic style. "Power doesn't corrupt. Protection of power does." The legal team gathered their materials, speaking in excited whispers about the elegance of the trap. As they filed out, Marcus paused at the door. "Mr. Cole, that was masterful." Elijah merely nodded, already focused on his next task. His screen showed a draft email to building security, calmly instructing them to escort Richard Whitman from the premises. No drama, no public scene, just quiet, efficient removal of another obstacle to progress. Lorraine remained behind, watching as Elijah worked. She remembered the young man who used to write in a notebook during his cleaning shifts, planning and preparing for a future few could have imagined. Now she understood. He'd been playing this game long before anyone knew he was even on the board. The morning sun continued its path across the sky, casting shifting patterns through the windows. Below, in the hotel lobby, guests checked in and out, unaware of the power shift that had just occurred in the quiet office above. Richard Whitman's nameplate was already being removed from his office door, his access cards deactivated, his parking space reassigned. The evening settled over Chicago like a soft blanket, bringing with it the kind of quiet that only comes after a day of momentous change. Elijah's footsteps echoed through the nearly empty halls of the Argentum, each step stirring memories from the polished marble floors. The rebuild team had left hours ago, their temporary workstations now dark and silent. He found himself drawn to the old staff dining area, a space tucked away in the building's heart, where hierarchy had once been strictly enforced through unwritten rules and cold stares. The room looked different now. The harsh fluorescent lights had been replaced with warmer fixtures, and the worn furniture had been updated. But the memories remained as sharp as ever. Elijah ran his hand along one of the tables, feeling its smooth surface. 20 years ago, he'd sat here during his designated break time, carefully unpacking the lunch he'd brought from home. He remembered the exact moment when Mr. Patterson, then the food and beverage manager, had approached his table. "This area is for regular staff only," Patterson had said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Maintenance personnel eat in the basement break room." The shame of that moment still lingered, not because of the words themselves, but because of how normal such treatment had seemed back then. Young Elijah had gathered his things without a word, feeling dozens of eyes on his back as he walked out. Now, standing in that same spot, Elijah noticed how the evening light painted long shadows across the floor. The room felt different, empty, more honest somehow, stripped of the pretenses that had once filled it. "Mr. Cole?" The voice startled him from his thoughts. In the doorway stood an older woman in a neat housekeeping supervisor's uniform, her badge reading, "Ms. Adeyemi." Her face carried the kind of wisdom that comes from decades of watching and understanding. "Ms. Adeyemi," Elijah nodded, recognizing her from the staff files he'd reviewed. "You're working late." "Some habits are hard to break," she smiled, stepping into the room. "I remember you, from before. You were always so quiet, so proper, even when they treated you badly." Elijah tilted his head slightly, studying her face. "You were here then?" 23 years in housekeeping," she confirmed, her Nigerian accent gentle but clear. "I saw many things, including what happened with Ms. Marshall, with Lorraine." Something in her tone made Elijah pause. He gestured to a nearby table, and they both sat down. "There's something you should know," Ms. Adeyemi continued, her hands folded carefully on the table, "about why Lorraine really left. It wasn't just insubordination like they claimed." Elijah leaned forward slightly, his usually impassive face showing a flicker of concern. "She filed a formal complaint," Ms. Adeyemi said, her voice dropping lower, "about Marcus Thompson, the security supervisor back then. She saw him." She paused, choosing her words carefully. She saw him rough you up in the storage room, push you around, threaten you. You were just a boy. The memory hit Elijah like a physical force. He remembered that day, the darkness of the storage room, the sharp pain of being shoved against metal shelving, the threats about what would happen if anything went missing during his shifts. He'd never told anyone. Lorraine witnessed it, Ms. Adeyemi continued. She went straight to HR, filed a formal complaint. But the board... She shook her head slowly. They buried it, offered her money to stay quiet. When she refused, they blacklisted her, made sure she couldn't work in any hotel in Chicago. Elijah sat very still, processing this new information. All these years, he'd thought Lorraine had simply stood up against unfair treatment. He'd never known the full extent of her sacrifice. She never took their money, Ms. Adeyemi added, never signed their papers, said she couldn't live with herself if she did. That's why they were so thorough in destroying her career. The weight of this revelation settled heavily on Elijah's shoulders. He remembered how Lorraine had disappeared suddenly, how no one would tell him where she'd gone, how he'd looked for her at other hotels when he got older, never understanding why he couldn't find her. "Thank you," he said quietly to Ms. Adeyemi, "for telling me this." She nodded, standing up. Some truths need time to be told, but they should never stay buried forever. With that, she left him alone in the dining area, her footsteps fading down the hall. Elijah remained seated for a long while, watching the last traces of daylight fade from the windows. The burden of this knowledge felt heavier than any business decision he'd made that day. But instead of the anger he might have expected, he felt something else, a deep, profound gratitude. He pulled out his phone, started to type a message, then stopped. No, this needed something more personal. He walked to the nearest break room, found a piece of paper and a pen, and sat down at the small table. The words came easily, flowing from his heart rather than his mind. "You didn't just protect me, you gave me a future." The simplicity of the message felt right. Anything more would have diminished its truth. He folded the paper carefully and walked to Lorraine's new office. The door was locked for the night, but the gap beneath it was wide enough. He knelt down and slid the note through, watching it disappear into the darkness of her office. Standing up, Elijah straightened his jacket and looked out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. The note felt inadequate compared to what Lorraine had sacrificed, but it was a start, an acknowledgement of a debt he hadn't even known he owed. He turned and walked toward the elevator, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The burden of knowledge was heavy, but it strengthened his resolve. Every change he was making now felt more personal, more necessary than ever before. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as a line began forming outside the Argentum. Young faces, bright with hope and nervous energy, created a diverse tapestry against the hotel's limestone facade. Many clutched folders containing resumes and references, while others tapped anxiously on their phones, reviewing their qualifications one last time. Deshaun Rivers stood near the middle of the line, his pressed white shirt crisp against dark slacks. He kept adjusting his tie, a habit born of nervousness rather than necessity. The memory of his last interview here just a year ago still stung. The interviewer had barely looked at his resume before dismissing him with those carefully chosen words. "Your demeanor doesn't quite fit our brand." Now, watching other applicants file through the grand entrance, Deshaun noticed something different. The security guard smiled warmly, holding doors open. The front desk staff made eye contact, offering genuine welcomes. Even the air felt different, charged with possibility rather than pretense. Inside the hotel's newly converted interview center, Lorraine moved efficiently between 3 interview rooms, each staffed with a diverse panel of evaluators. She'd insisted on this setup, multiple perspectives for each candidate with resumes stripped of names and photos during the initial review process. "Remember," she told the panels during their morning briefing, "we're looking for talent, drive, and potential. Nothing else." Her eyes had lingered meaningfully on each person, carrying the weight of her own history in that gaze. The first wave of interviews began promptly at 9. Candidates brought forward experiences from hotels, restaurants, retail stores, some with degrees, others with years of hands-on experience. Each interview followed the same structured format, with questions focused on practical scenarios and problem-solving skills. Through the one-way mirror of Observation Room 3, Elijah watched as Deshaun entered for his interview. The young man's nervousness showed in the way he gripped his portfolio, but his voice remained steady as he greeted the panel. "Could you tell us about a challenging customer service situation you've handled?" asked the lead interviewer, a woman whose own journey from housekeeper to operations manager spanned 15 years. Deshaun took a breath, then shared a story about dealing with an angry guest at his current job at a downtown restaurant. His hands animated the tale, describing how he'd turned the situation around through patience and understanding. The panel leaned forward, engaged by his natural storytelling ability. "I see you speak 3 languages," another interviewer noted, reviewing the blind resume codenamed Candidate 147. "Yes," Deshaun smiled, relaxing slightly. "English, Spanish, and Mandarin. I learned Spanish from my grandmother and Mandarin through an exchange program in college." In the observation room, Elijah made a note on his tablet. Multilingual skills were valuable in a hotel that hosted international guests, but it was Deshaun's easy warmth that caught his attention. The young man had a presence that made others comfortable, exactly what they needed in guest services. The interview continued, covering scenarios from crisis management to team leadership. Deshaun handled each question thoughtfully, his earlier nervousness replaced by genuine enthusiasm. When asked about his previous application to the Argentum, he was honest. "Being rejected last year was hard," he admitted. "I knew I had the qualifications, but I was told my demeanor wasn't right for the brand. It made me question myself for a while. But then I realized, maybe it wasn't me that needed to change." Through the glass, Elijah nodded slowly. He'd heard variations of this story too many times in the past week. Qualified candidates turned away for nebulous reasons that masked deeper biases. By early afternoon, the interview panels had seen dozens of candidates. Each room maintained detailed notes, scoring applicants on a transparent rubric that focused on skills, experience, and potential. The old system of gut feelings and cultural fit had been replaced with clear, measurable criteria. Near the main lobby, a large bulletin board stood empty, its surface freshly painted. As the day progressed, names began appearing, new hires chosen purely on merit. Each posting represented not just a job offer, but a small victory against the system that had once excluded so many. Deshaun's name appeared just after 3 o'clock, posted alongside his new title, Guest Services Team Lead. Below it, other names filled the board: Maria Chen for Front Office Operations, James Washington for Events Coordination, Sarah Patel for Restaurant Management. 23 names in total, each one a story of talent finally recognized. Lorraine walked past the bulletin board late in the afternoon when the last interviews were wrapping up. She paused, reading each name slowly, remembering her own days of rejection and silence. The board that had once reflected a narrow view of acceptable candidates now showcased the true diversity of talent that had always existed, waiting to be acknowledged. "Let them see now," she whispered, touching the edge of the board gently. Her words carried the weight of decades, of countless qualified people turned away, of talents ignored, of voices silenced. But today marked a change. Today these names would be seen, these voices would be heard, and these talents would finally have their chance to shine. The new hires would start training next week, bringing fresh energy and perspectives to the hotel's transformation. The old board members who had once dismissed candidates based on fit would see their former policies dismantled, replaced by a system that recognized merit in all its forms. As the sun began to set, casting warm light through the lobby's grand windows, the bulletin board stood as a testament to change. 23 names, 23 stories, 23 futures now unfolding in ways that would have seemed impossible just days before. Each name represented not just a new employee, but a step toward redefining what excellence looked like in the hospitality industry. 2 days later, the grand ballroom of the Argentum Hotel buzzed with anticipation. Gone were the dated chandeliers and worn carpeting, replaced by modern LED lighting and sleek flooring. The space had been transformed into a contemporary media center, with cameras positioned strategically throughout the room and a sophisticated audio system ensuring every word would be heard clearly. Lorraine moved methodically across the stage, checking each microphone with practiced precision. Her navy blazer and silver pendant reflected her new position, professional yet approachable. She tapped each mic, listening through an earpiece for any feedback or distortion. Everything had to be perfect for this moment. Behind the heavy curtain, Elijah stood quietly, his usual calm demeanor tinged with an underlying tension. He wore a simple charcoal suit, no tie, no flashy accessories. His fingers traced the edge of the speech cards in his pocket, though he knew he wouldn't need them. These words had lived in his heart for decades. The ballroom filled quickly with journalists, industry representatives, and hotel staff both old and new. The rebuild task force members sat together in a section near the front, their presence a visible reminder of the changes already taking place. Deshawn and other recent hires found their seats, their employee badges catching the light as they moved. Camera crews made final adjustments to their equipment while photographers tested their angles. The live stream countdown appeared on multiple screens around the room. 5 minutes until they went live to audiences across the country. Lorraine approached Elijah behind the curtain, straightening his collar with maternal care. "Ready?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He nodded, his eyes focused on something distant, perhaps remembering the young janitor he once was in these very halls. The lights dimmed slightly and a hush fell over the crowd. Lorraine took her place in the front row as Elijah stepped onto the stage. The cameras began rolling, red lights blinking in unison. For a moment, he stood silent at the podium, his presence commanding attention without a single word. "6 months ago," he began, his voice steady and clear, "I acquired majority ownership of this hotel through its parent company." He paused, letting the significance sink in. 2 days ago, I walked through those front doors as a guest wearing jeans and a hoodie. I was immediately profiled, questioned, and asked to leave. The room remained silent as he recounted the incident in detail. The dismissive receptionist, the aggressive security response, the assumptions made based solely on his appearance. He described walking away that day, not in shame but with purpose. Moving to a large screen behind him, Elijah began sharing the surveillance footage. Scenes played out showing systematic discrimination, black guests being scrutinized more heavily, Asian tourists being mocked behind their backs, Latino job applicants being passed over despite superior qualifications. "This isn't about individual blame," he continued, his voice carrying both authority and compassion. "This is about patterns so deeply embedded in our culture that they became invisible to those perpetuating them." He showed internal emails, hiring statistics, complaint records, all building a clear picture of systemic racism at work. The audience watched as years of documented bias unfolded before them. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing their own complicity. Others nodded in grim validation of experiences they'd lived through themselves. "Change isn't about punishment," Elijah explained, moving away from the podium to address the room more directly. "It's about accountability and growth. It's about creating systems that protect and elevate all voices, not just the ones we're used to hearing." He detailed the changes already implemented, the transparent hiring process, the diverse leadership teams, the new training programs, the anonymous reporting systems. Each initiative designed not just to prevent discrimination, but to actively foster inclusion. "But this transformation needs more than my voice," he said, turning toward the front row. "It needs someone who understands both the pain of the past and the potential of the future. Someone who chose to stand up when standing up meant losing everything." Elijah extended his hand toward Lorraine. "I'm honored to introduce our new director of rebuild, Lorraine Marshall. 20 years ago, she lost her job at this hotel for defending a young janitor against false accusations. That janitor was me." Lorraine rose from her seat, emotion visible on her face despite her professional composure. The rebuild task force members stood first, their applause spreading through the room like a wave. The new hires joined, then the journalists, until the entire ballroom was on its feet. She walked to the stage with dignity, accepting Elijah's outstretched hand. The cameras caught their moment of shared triumph. The former maid and the former janitor, now standing together as architects of change. Lorraine stepped to the microphone, her voice strong with conviction. "This is more than a job for me. This is a mission to ensure that no one else has to choose between their dignity and their paycheck. We're not just rebuilding a hotel, we're rebuilding trust, opportunity, and hope." As the formal presentation concluded and the crowd began to disperse, a young black girl, no more than 12, made her way to the stage. She wore a pretty yellow dress, her hair in neat braids, and her eyes shone with purpose as she approached Lorraine. "My mom used to clean rooms here," the girl said, her voice small but clear. "She said they never let her speak." Lorraine knelt down to meet the girl's eyes, careful cameras capturing the spontaneous moment. "You'll speak now," she said softly, her words carrying the weight of promise. "We all will." The girl threw her arms around Lorraine's neck in an unexpected hug. The cameras continued rolling as Lorraine returned the embrace, her professional demeanor softening into genuine warmth. Neither of them knew it yet, but this unscripted moment of connection would soon spread across social media, touching hearts far beyond the hotel's walls. Later that evening, in a wood-paneled private room at an exclusive downtown club, 7 former Argentum executives gathered around a polished mahogany table. The air was thick with cigar smoke and tension. Richard Blackwood, the former head of operations, paced near the window, his face red with anger. "He can't just walk in and destroy everything we've built," Blackwood spat, taking an aggressive sip of his scotch. "There are protocols, procedures. This isn't how business is done." Margaret Wheeler, who had been the hotel's legal counsel for 15 years, spread several documents across the table. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against the papers as she spoke. "We might have grounds for a discrimination suit. If we can prove he targeted specific board members based on their race—" "Oh, that's rich," James Peterson, the former VP of marketing, scoffed. "Using anti-discrimination laws against him. The media would eat that up." The room grew quieter as Thomas Harrison, the most senior of the ousted executives, pulled out his phone. His fingers moved swiftly across the screen as he typed. "I've got a contact at the Daily Scene. They've been looking for a controversy like this. We spin it right, we can make Cole look like a radical with an agenda." The others leaned forward, interest piqued. Harrison continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "Think about it. Vengeful billionaire uses wealth to force extreme ideology. We focus on the good employees who lost their jobs, the disruption to guests, the forced diversity quotas." "What about Marshall?" Peterson asked, loosening his tie. "She's going to be a problem. People love a redemption story." Harrison smiled coldly. "Then we make sure they question what they're being redeemed from. I've got 15 years of performance reviews that can paint any picture we want." The group worked late into the night crafting their narrative. They sent emails, made calls, and pulled strings they'd collected over decades in the industry. By midnight, the pieces were in place. The next morning, the Daily Scene's website featured a bold headline: "Billionaire hijacks hotel in radical racial agenda." The article painted Elijah Cole as a dangerous ideologue using his wealth to enforce reverse racism and anti-white discrimination. It quoted anonymous sources claiming longtime employees were being forced out to make room for diversity hires, regardless of qualifications. Social media exploded within hours. Argentum Truth and Monarch Save Argentum began trending, with users divided sharply between those supporting Cole's changes and those decrying them as extreme. Video clips from the press conference were edited and taken out of context, making Elijah's measured words sound militant and threatening. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered outside the hotel. Some carried signs reading, "Stop the woke takeover," and "Protect our jobs." Local news vans parked along the street, their cameras focused on the growing protest. Inside the hotel, tension mounted. Lorraine sat in her office, staring at her computer screen filled with hateful messages. One email particularly caught her eye. "You think you're safe because he's protecting you? Wait until he's done using you." She closed the email, her hands shaking slightly, but her resolve unchanged. Down in the lobby, Deshawn and other new hires huddled near the front desk, watching the protesters through the glass doors. Maybe they're right, one young woman whispered. Maybe we're only here because… Because what? Deshaun interrupted, though his own voice carried uncertainty. Because someone finally gave us a fair shot? The rebuild task force members tried to maintain normal operations, but the weight of the backlash was palpable. Security had been doubled, and all staff were advised to use the service entrance to avoid confrontation with protesters. By early afternoon, Elijah called an emergency all-staff meeting in the employee dining room. The space was packed, with workers from every department standing shoulder to shoulder. Fear and uncertainty showed on many faces. Elijah stood at the front of the room, his posture relaxed despite the circumstances. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves, making him look more like the janitor he once was than the billionaire the media portrayed. "They want fear to break us," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Let's show them who we are when we're not afraid." He gestured to Lorraine, who wheeled in a cart loaded with laptops and tablets. "Right now, our PR team is preparing to release everything," he continued. "Every piece of surveillance footage, every internal document, every email chain and hiring record from the past 20 years. No editing, no commentary, no spin, just truth." A murmur ran through the crowd. Lorraine stepped forward, her voice steady despite the morning's threats. "They think they can shame us back into silence. But silence is what protected them, not us." Elijah moved closer to the group of new hires. "Each of you was hired because you earned it. Your qualifications, your experience, your potential. These are facts, not opinions. Anyone who says different can check the records themselves because as of tonight, they'll all be public." He turned to address the entire room. "They're betting that fear will make us doubt ourselves, that threats will make us question our worth, that chaos will make us retreat." He paused, making eye contact with various staff members. "But they forgot something important. We've lived with their kind of fear before. It's nothing new. The only difference is, this time we're standing together." The tension in the room began to shift. Shoulders straightened, chins lifted. The fear wasn't gone, but it was being replaced by something stronger: determination. "I want everyone to go home early today," Elijah announced. "Be with your families. Rest. Tomorrow we walk in through the front door together. No side entrances, no hiding. This is our house now." As the staff began to disperse, Lorraine's tablet lit up with a notification. The first wave of documents had been uploaded to major news outlets. On screen after screen, the unedited truth began to spread. Raw footage, unaltered documents, complete email chains. Decades of systematic discrimination laid bare for the world to see. By midnight, the unedited documents and footage had spread across every major news platform. The raw truth of decades of discrimination at the Argentum Hotel lay exposed in stark detail. Social media feeds filled with screenshots of damning emails, clips of discriminatory incidents, and statistics that showed an unmistakable pattern of bias. CNN ran an hour-long special titled, "The Argentum Files: Systemic Discrimination Exposed." MSNBC's headline read, "Hotel Giant's Hidden History of Racism Revealed." Even conservative outlets couldn't spin the overwhelming evidence. The Daily Scene, which had published the hit piece earlier, quietly removed it from their website. Former employees began sharing their stories. Maria Rodriguez, who had worked as a housekeeper for 12 years, appeared on Good Morning America. "They told me my accent was too strong for guest interaction," she said, tears in her eyes. "But I heard them mock it behind my back. They kept me hidden, cleaning rooms, even though I had a degree in hospitality management." Marcus Thompson, a former bellhop who had applied for management positions 7 times, shared his story on Twitter. "Every time, they said I wasn't polished enough. Now I see the emails where they called me too urban behind closed doors." His thread went viral, with thousands sharing similar experiences from hotels across the country. The protesters outside the Argentum gradually disappeared, replaced by supporters holding signs that read, "Thank you, Elijah Cole," and "Justice at Last." Civil rights organizations issued statements of support. The NAACP praised the Transparency Initiative as a model for corporate accountability. Inside the hotel, Staff members gathered around phones and computers, watching their lived experiences validated on a national stage. Deshawn, one of the new hires, stood in the break room watching a news segment about the story. "My mom called crying," he told his colleagues. "She said she wished someone had done this 20 years ago when she was trying to break into the industry." By morning, the narrative had completely shifted. Argentum truth now meant something entirely different. The hashtag filled with stories of discrimination from across the hospitality industry. A black executive chef in Miami shared how he'd been passed over for promotion 8 times. A Latina concierge in Los Angeles described being told to use an American name tag. The hotel industry took notice. By mid-morning, Elijah's office began receiving calls from shareholders and board members of other luxury hotel chains. They wanted to know more about his equity model. The Cole Institute's website crashed temporarily from the volume of downloads of the organizational equity blueprint. Sarah Chen, a major shareholder in Pacific Luxury Hotels, requested an urgent meeting. "We need to get ahead of this," she wrote in her email. "Your model isn't just moral, it's the future of sustainable business." The movement spread beyond hotels. Tech companies, restaurants, and retail chains began downloading the blueprint. A consulting firm in Singapore announced they would implement the Cole model across their Asian properties. A Dubai-based investment group reached out about partnering on a global hospitality equity initiative. Social media continued to amplify the impact. A black woman in London posted a tweet that resonated worldwide. "I used to feel invisible in luxury spaces. Now I feel seen." The post accumulated hundreds of thousands of likes and shares, sparking a global conversation about representation in high-end services. Lorraine spent the morning fielding calls from media outlets and industry leaders. The Rebuild Task Force's phones rang constantly with inquiries about their hiring and training methods. Simone, the former HR assistant who had provided the whistleblower evidence, found herself being called a hero on social media. The former executives who had attempted to discredit Elijah went silent. Their carefully crafted narrative had crumbled under the weight of irrefutable evidence. Several of their industry colleagues publicly distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with the exposed discrimination. As the day progressed, Elijah worked quietly in his office, responding to messages from industry leaders and reviewing implementation requests. The walls of his office were covered with new organizational charts and training protocols. On his desk sat a stack of letters from people sharing their stories of workplace discrimination. Late in the afternoon, Lorraine knocked on his door. She carried a cream-colored envelope in her hand. "This just came by courier," she said, placing it on his desk. Elijah opened the letter carefully. The handwriting was elegant, but the hand that wrote it had clearly trembled. It was from Thomas Harrison, one of the former board members who had been most vocal against him. "Dear Mr. Cole," the letter began, "I've spent the past 24 hours watching my life's work be exposed for what it truly was. I defended our practices for so long that I convinced myself they were justified. Seeing the evidence laid bare, hearing the stories of those we hurt, I can no longer hide from the truth, even from myself." The letter continued, detailing Harrison's personal journey from denial to recognition. He described specific instances where he had perpetuated discrimination, moments when he had chosen comfort over conscience. "I am not asking for forgiveness," he wrote. "I am simply acknowledging my guilt, my shame, and my hope that your work continues to succeed where we so dramatically failed." Elijah read the letter twice, his expression thoughtful. Without comment, he opened his desk drawer and carefully placed the letter inside. Lorraine, who had been watching, asked, "Should we release it?" "It could help show people can change." Elijah shook his head slowly. "Some truths don't need headlines," he said quietly. "They just need to live in someone's heart." He turned to look out his window at the city skyline, where other luxury hotels rose like glass and steel monuments. In their reflective surfaces, he could see the afternoon sun setting, casting long shadows across the urban landscape. Each of those buildings held its own stories, its own truths waiting to be acknowledged. The letter in his drawer was just one small piece of a much larger transformation. 1 week later, The morning sun cast a golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the newly renamed Cole Institute for Hospitality Equity. Gone were the old pretensions of the Argentum. In their place stood something both grander and more welcoming. The marble floors gleamed beneath the light, but now they seemed to invite rather than intimidate. The lobby hummed with activity as staff members moved purposefully through their morning routines. Their new uniforms, designed with input from the employees themselves, featured comfortable cuts and materials in deep blue with gold accents. Each nameplate displayed the staff member's actual name, not the anglicized versions many had been forced to use before. Maria proudly wore her tag reading Maria Rodriguez, her master's degree in hospitality management noted beneath her name. Besides her, Ahmed's nameplate displayed both English and Arabic script, reflecting the diverse clientele they served. The staff moved with a quiet confidence that came from knowing they belonged exactly where they were. A warm breeze drifted through the open doors, carrying the scent of fresh flowers from the newly installed garden. The previous week's tension had dissipated, replaced by an atmosphere of genuine warmth and professionalism. At the front desk, a young woman in a hijab helped check in an elderly couple, her smile bright and natural. Near the elevators, a black concierge explained local attractions to a family, his knowledge and enthusiasm evident in every gesture. The morning progressed and guests began arriving in greater numbers. Some carried newspapers with headlines about the hotel's transformation. Others clutched their phones, having read about the changes on social media. Their expressions ranged from curious to skeptical, but each received the same level of attentive, authentic service. A middle-aged businessman, clearly a frequent traveler, studied his surroundings with narrow eyes. He'd stayed at the Argentum dozens of times before and seemed to be cataloging every change. But as a young bellhop efficiently handled his luggage while engaging him in conversation about his favorite local restaurants, the man's expression softened. By the time he reached his room, he was smiling and taking notes about the staff's recommendations. Elijah Cole walked the floor not as an owner conducting an inspection, but as someone genuinely interested in the day-to-day operations. He wore a simple suit, no tie, and greeted each staff member by name. He stopped to help a housekeeper adjust a heavy cart, remembered to ask about another employee's sick mother, and paused to straighten a painting that hung slightly askew. Near the concierge desk, he spotted Deshaun Rivers, who stood tall in his perfectly pressed uniform. Deshaun was leading a team of 4 other concierges, explaining the new guest experience protocols with natural authority and patience. A guest approached asking about dinner reservations, and Deshaun's response was both professional and warmly personal. "The jazz club on Michigan Avenue would be perfect for what you're looking for," Deshaun said, pulling up details on his tablet. "They have live music starting at 8, and their chef actually trained in New Orleans. Let me make sure you get a table with a view of both the stage and the lake." The guest beamed at his attention to detail, never knowing that just months ago, this same hotel had rejected Deshaun's application because his demeanor didn't fit the brand. Now he embodied everything the brand aspired to be: competent, caring, and genuine. Throughout the morning, similar scenes played out across the hotel. In the restaurant, a chef who had once been relegated to prep work now ran the kitchen with quiet authority. At the spa, a therapist who had been told her accent was too ethnic now had a waiting list of regular clients who requested her by name. The transformation wasn't just cosmetic. Every interaction between staff and guests felt different, more human, more real. There was no more forced formality, no more artificial scripts. Instead, there was authentic engagement, genuine care, and a sense that everyone, guest and staff alike, was valued for exactly who they were. Near the employee entrance, Lorraine Marshall stood watching the morning shift change. Staff members clocked in, greeting each other with genuine warmth. Some had been there for years, hidden in back offices or basement kitchens. Others were new hires, bringing fresh energy and perspectives. All of them now moved with the confidence of people who knew they belonged. She held an old photograph in her hand, studying it one last time before placing it in a simple but elegant frame. The image showed a much younger version of herself standing next to a teenage Elijah, both in janitor's uniforms. Their smiles were tentative then, unsure. But even in that old photo, there was something in their eyes, a determination, a dignity that no amount of discrimination had managed to extinguish. Carefully, Lorraine hung the frame beside the new staff schedule. The contrast between past and present was striking. The old photo in black and white, the new schedule filled with color and life. Below both, a newly installed brass plaque gleamed in the morning light. Its message was simple but powerful. No one belongs more than you. Outside the hotel's main entrance, where angry protesters had stood just a week ago, a very different scene unfolded. A line of job applicants stretched down the block, people of all backgrounds clutching resumes and hope in equal measure. Some had applied before and been rejected. Others had never dared to try, knowing the old reputation. Now they stood together, chatting and sharing stories, waiting for their chance to be part of something new. The morning sun continued to rise over Chicago, its light catching the hotel's windows and creating countless tiny rainbows on the sidewalk. Each rainbow seemed to fall on a different face in that long line of applicants, as if nature itself was highlighting the beauty of diversity. The old protest signs were gone, replaced by the quiet dignity of people who knew their time had finally come. 2 days after the soft opening, the Cole Institute for Hospitality Equity buzzed with a quiet energy that felt different from its previous incarnation. Gone was the artificial formality that had once defined the Argentum. In its place was something more genuine, a warmth that couldn't be trained or scripted. Staff members moved through their duties wearing silver pins that declared seen, heard, valued, against their new uniforms. The simple message carried weight, transforming what could have been just another corporate slogan into a visible reminder of their restored dignity. Lorraine Marshall walked the halls with measured steps, her keen eyes taking in every detail. She paused to watch a new hire, Sarah, arranging flowers in the lobby. The young woman's hands moved with confidence, creating an arrangement that reflected her own artistic vision rather than following the rigid templates of the past. "Beautiful work," Lorraine said, noting how Sarah's face lit up at the recognition. "The colors remind me of sunrise." "Thank you, Ms. Marshall," Sarah replied, adjusting a vibrant orange lily. "I remembered what you said about making guests feel welcome from the moment they walk in." Lorraine continued her rounds, stopping to check on the housekeeping staff, many of whom she'd personally trained. In the service corridors, she noticed how the team members now walked with their heads held high, greeting each other and guests with natural ease. The fear that had once permeated these halls had been replaced by quiet pride. In the kitchen, she observed the new head chef, Marcus, leading his team through the lunch preparations. He'd been a line cook for 8 years under the old management, his culinary degree from Le Cordon Bleu ignored. Now he ran the kitchen with a combination of expertise and empathy that had already earned him his team's loyalty. As Lorraine made notes on her tablet, a message notification appeared. It was from the front desk, marked urgent but not emergency. A guest named Nina Grayson had checked in early, requesting a meeting with management when possible. The name triggered something in Lorraine's memory, a face from the past, a story that needed closure. Meanwhile, in his office, Elijah Cole reviewed the morning reports when the same message reached him. His eyes lingered on the name Grayson, and suddenly he was transported back to a conversation with Lorraine months ago, during their initial audit of the hotel's history. There had been a file, thin but significant, about a housekeeper wrongly accused of theft. The hotel's newly redesigned cafe occupied what had once been an underutilized conference room. Warm woods and comfortable seating had replaced the stark corporate furniture. Local artwork hung on the walls, each piece created by artists from communities once excluded from these spaces. Nina Grayson sat at a corner table, her fingers tracing the edge of an old photograph. She was a woman in her early 40s, dressed professionally but comfortably, with her mother's high cheekbones and determined set to her jaw. The photograph she held showed a younger woman in a hotel uniform, standing proud despite the weight of inequality she carried. Elijah approached quietly, recognizing the uniform from his own days working in these halls. "Ms. Grayson," he said softly, "I'm Elijah Cole." Nina looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Cole, thank you for seeing me." She gestured to the chair across from her. "I've been following what you've done here, what you're doing." Elijah sat down, his attention focused entirely on Nina and the photograph she still held. "Your mother was Margaret Grayson," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Nina replied, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "She worked here for 12 years, until ... Until they accused her of stealing a guest's diamond earrings," Elijah finished. "I read the file. They never found the earrings, never had any proof, but they fired her anyway." Nina nodded, finally allowing a tear to fall. She never worked in hospitality again. The accusation followed her everywhere. She passed away still believing she'd never clear her name. Elijah's normally composed face showed a flash of pain. "The system wasn't broken, Ms. Grayson. It was built this way. To silence, to shame, to make people doubt their own worth." "Mom never doubted herself," Nina said firmly. "She knew who she was. But it hurt her that others didn't see it, that they chose not to see it." They sat in understanding silence for a moment, two people connected by the echo of past injustices. Then Elijah reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather folder. "I'd like to offer you a position," he said, sliding the folder across the table. "On the Institute's Board of Advisors. We're creating a wall of honor, recognizing those who maintained their dignity when the system tried to strip it away. Your mother's name would be the first." Nina opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was an official appointment letter, and beneath it, a rendering of a wall panel. There, etched in elegant script, "Margaret Rose Grayson. Her strength lights our way." Tears fell freely now as Nina traced her mother's name with her finger. "You've made her proud," she whispered, looking up at Elijah. "So proud." Elijah shook his head gently. "No," he replied, his voice warm with conviction. "We did. Every person who stands up, who speaks out, who refuses to let injustice have the final word, we all carry your mother's spirit forward." Later that night, as the city settled into its evening rhythm, Elijah stood in the hotel's rooftop garden. The space had been transformed from a rarely used terrace into a living testament to growth and renewal. Native plants thrived in carefully tended beds, their leaves swaying gently in the Chicago breeze. City lights sparkled below like earthbound stars, each one representing countless stories of struggle and triumph. The garden offered a perfect vantage point to see both where they'd been and where they were going. Lorraine's footsteps were familiar as she joined him by the railing. Without a word, she handed him a folder containing the latest financial reports. The numbers told a clear story. The Institute wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Guests were booking months in advance, specifically requesting to be part of this new vision of hospitality. "You gave them hope," Lorraine said simply, watching the city lights dance across the lake. Elijah looked up at the night sky, where real stars fought to be seen through the urban glow. "Hope gave them back to themselves," he replied, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of a truth long known but finally spoken. 3 months passed like a gentle breeze through the transformed halls of the Cole Institute. On a crisp autumn morning, sunlight filtered through the courtyard's newly planted maple trees, casting dappled shadows on the gathering crowd. The space hummed with anticipation as guests, staff, and media assembled around a tall shape draped in midnight blue velvet. Lorraine stood to the side, uncharacteristically fidgety, smoothing her blazer for the 10th time. She hadn't known about this. Elijah had kept it a secret, which was no small feat given their daily interactions. Her eyes kept darting to the covered form, trying to guess its dimensions, its meaning. The courtyard itself had been redesigned as a peaceful sanctuary, with curved benches and flowing water features that seemed to whisper ancient stories. Native wildflowers bordered the paths, their late-season blooms adding splashes of purple and gold to the scene. It was a far cry from the sterile corporate space it had once been. Elijah approached the podium, his presence drawing all eyes naturally. He wore a simple charcoal suit, no tie, the same kind of understated elegance that marked everything about the Institute's new direction. The microphone caught his quiet clearing of throat. "Some stories," he began, "are written in marble and glass, others in policies and profits. But the most important ones are written in moments of courage, when one person stands up and says, This is not right. His eyes found Lorraine in the crowd. Today we honor such a moment. At his signal, 2 staff members gently pulled away the velvet covering. Gasps rippled through the audience as the bronze sculpture emerged into the morning light. There stood Lorraine, captured in perfect detail, not as she was now, but as she had been 20 years ago in her hotel uniform. Her hand rested protectively on the shoulder of a young janitor, his face bearing the unmistakable features of teenage Elijah. The artistry was extraordinary. Even in bronze, one could see the fierce determination in Lorraine's expression, the mix of fear and dignity in young Elijah's stance. Lorraine's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as she read the plaque at the base. "It takes one voice to protect a future." The words seemed to shimmer in the sunlight, each letter carrying the weight of decades of silence finally broken. The crowd burst into applause, but Lorraine barely heard it. She was lost in the memory of that day. The day she'd chosen to speak up, to face down the board members who thought they could erase a young man's dignity with their assumptions and prejudices. She hadn't known then that she was protecting a future billionaire. She'd simply been protecting a child who deserved better. Months passed, and the Institute's influence spread like ripples in a pond. Elijah began traveling to other cities, carrying the blueprint that had transformed the Chicago flagship. In Detroit, he converted an abandoned hotel into a training center for hospitality management, focusing on underserved communities. In Atlanta, a struggling chain adopted the Institute's equity protocols and saw their customer satisfaction scores soar. Schools began requesting workshops, corporations sought consulting services, and slowly the ripples became waves. Back in Chicago, the Institute flourished under Lorraine's steady hand. The Rebuild Council, now a formal body of advisors and changemakers, met weekly to ensure the mission never wavered. They reviewed hiring practices, mentored new staff, and maintained the delicate balance between profitable business and social justice. On a bright spring morning, a reporter from the Tribune sat with Lorraine in the rooftop garden. The interview had covered the usual topics: occupancy rates, employee retention, community impact. But then came the question that made Lorraine pause. "Did you ever imagine this day?" the reporter asked, gesturing to the thriving institution around them. "When you were fired for speaking up, did you see this future?" Lorraine's smile held decades of unspoken dreams. "I imagined more than this," she said softly. "I just never said it out loud." Simone Hayes, standing nearby with her Director of Internal Ethics badge gleaming, stepped forward. Her voice carried the confidence of someone who had found her own power to speak. "Say it now." Lorraine looked out at the gathered crowd, staff members, guests, journalists, all waiting for her words. The silence that had once been imposed on her had transformed into a moment of chosen quiet, heavy with possibility. "This is not a hotel," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It's a blueprint for what happens when silence is broken and voices are heard." The words rang across the rooftop, carrying truth that had waited years to be spoken. As evening settled over the city, Elijah made his way through the quiet halls of the Institute. His footsteps echoed softly as he descended to the old service level, where the staff locker room had been preserved as a reminder of where it all began. The space had been transformed into a small museum of sorts, though museum wasn't quite the right word. It was more of a sanctuary of memory, where the past was honored rather than simply displayed. The walls held photographs and stories of staff members who had faced discrimination over the decades, their experiences now serving as powerful testimony to the need for change. In the center of the room stood Lorraine's original locker, now encased in clear glass. The metal was still scratched and dented, the paint faded, beautiful in its authenticity. Inside, her old name tag caught the low light, the letters of her name still clearly visible after all these years. Next to it stood a new locker, its surface pristine. A small plaque identified it. Elijah Cole, first trainee, eternal student. The words made him smile. They captured exactly what he had wanted to convey. That leadership began with learning, and learning never truly ended. From his jacket pocket, he withdrew the framed photograph that had traveled with him since the beginning of this journey. It showed a teenage boy in an oversized janitor's uniform standing next to a younger Lorraine. Both were smiling despite everything they faced in those days, or perhaps because of it. With careful movements, Elijah opened the new locker and placed the frame inside. The photo seemed to belong there, a bridge between past and present, between what was and what could be. He closed the locker gently, the soft click echoing in the quiet room. If you enjoyed the story of Elijah, I hand-picked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. If you enjoyed the story of Elijah, I hand-picked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.